Hey everyone, this is the Think Truth podcast. It's Drew and Elijah, and we are looking forward to a fascinating exchange here on the topic of Christmas. It's funny because I just read Christmas Carol actually this week,
Nice.
which was fascinating. For some reason, I'm all into Dickens right now. I'm working through Oliver Twist, and I just got finished with the Christmas Carol. So. Have you read that book?
Yeah.
It's interesting how Christmas has evolved and changed and
For sure.
morphed over the centuries, and the different traditions and myths and stuff that have come along with that. But we think it would be a good idea to talk about Christmas, obviously partially because it's nearly Christmas. It's Advent season right now. And there are some controversies that exist around the topic for sure. I grew up actually for most of my growing up years with a pretty anti-Christmas sort of environment. With the church and my family and all that, which both the church and my family have kind of morphed into a little bit more of a pro-Christmas take. But your family, on the other hand,
Grew up very pro-Christmas. Like it was the highlight of the year for me as a kid. Yeah. So
just fascinating. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe the reasons why some had concerns and moved away from celebrating Christmas. And then just more generally, let's just talk about what does a healthy Christian celebration ethic when it comes to Christmas look like?
Very good.
So maybe a little context first. I'll just talk a little bit about some of the objections that I heard. And okay.
Yeah.
There's of course, there's the children's lesson that came up every once in a while at Charity about how
Santa and Satan.
Yeah, if you switch the letters around in Santa, you get Satan. So, and Santa is a kind of antichrist figure because he knows everything about you and judges you on the basis of your deeds and I don't know.
Yeah, right.
And then but obviously there's more helpful perspectives. There were certainly concerns about what might be called the materialized nature, materialism shaped consumerist nature of Christmas. In fact, I have huge concerns about how Christmas can be celebrated and sometimes is celebrated, where it's really centered around selfishness. What I'm not convinced of is that automatically means that Christmas as a whole has sort of been denigrated beyond repair, and we should just kind of ignore it.
Right.
So there's the consumerism concerns. There's kind of like the Santa is demonic, or at least, you're lying to your kids, so you shouldn't have any sort of Santa. There's also like the Christmas is pagan. Did you grow up hearing that at all?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so what was your perspective?
I mean, I always thought it was silly, but I was always very defensive, of course, because as a kid, I loved Christmas.
So you had a tree and things.
Yeah, the big things about Christmas were, I mean, honestly, growing up, it was a time where we really did focus on, the joy and excitement of Jesus coming to earth as a baby. We didn't think he was literally born on December 25th. But yeah.
That's one of the arguments, right? Well, Jesus wasn't actually born on December 20th. There wasn't any snow.
It's like, oh my word, like Grinch. But no, I think for me, I mean, I'm a musician, and I think that was perhaps one of the first times that some of that came out, because we had a box of Christmas CDs of Christmas music.
Okay.
A lot of like more traditional hymns and Christmas carols.
Mostly sacred stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this
but
is
you
back.
would crack that open only once a year.
Yes. In fact, the day after Thanksgiving, we could go up to the attic and bring it down. And I was always totally waiting for that day. I'd go up and get the box of CDs and stuff. Nice. Looking back now, it's like, okay, there is something a little bit interesting about the fact I was that interested in particularly getting these CDs. And here I am now, a musician.
Right.
But so there was that. We would get a tree, which is not. We would cut it down. We'd go to a tree farm. It was like a special family outing. Have cookies, hot cocoa, whatever, and get the tree and decorate it, put lights on it, listen to music, Christmas music throughout all the month of December, and we gave gifts and stuff like that. But throughout that, again, a lot of focus on the meaning. You might say the meaning of Christmas, and people make fun of that. But no, seriously, like the beauty of Jesus coming down to earth as a baby, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of good things there. And it just felt like it was a very festive time. Not everything was like needs to be tied to like, why are you giving gifts? Like, what's the like biblical reason? Like, there isn't one in some sense. It's just like it's a good family tradition and a really nice thing to do at a kind of at the darkest time of the year. And very positive associations for me. And there is no Santa Claus. We always thought Santa Claus was silly. It's not like so. It's not like by being on to Christmas you have to somehow like, be okay with Santa Claus or something. And it wasn't in the past from either of my parents either. It's not like which I think is a key difference for some people. Like I think my family, both my parents, kind of are unique in the sense that they would have come to Christmas having a lot of a very strong celebration, very strong traditions, but not having a lot of negative
because it was kind of like Jesus centered and
yeah. And whereas I think some people, especially like in the charity context, that are from a non-Anabaptist background, celebrated Christmas, but it was heavily focused around Santa Claus or heavily commercialized or whatever.
Totally.
Whereas I think I was born into a family that already had a very positive, robust tradition associated with it that was completely irresistible for me as a kid.
That's great. Yeah. So I mean, the first point to be made, I guess, is we don't have to be absolutist about it. It's not like it's all or nothing. It's not like you're contaminated by celebrating Christmas through the unhelpful or negative ways that other people celebrate Christmas. That's sort of like an odd misconception.
Right.
But no, Christmas can be celebrated in a positive way. But let's start out by taking some of these objections and answering them. Then we'll go to like, okay, let's build what are some positive Christmas traditions?
Right.
What's a great way to incorporate this in a Jesus-centered, healthy way? So first of all, let's just talk about Santa. I mean, you don't celebrate Santa. I don't either. But what do you, I mean, certainly there are a lot of Christians who do.
Sure. Do
you want to say anything about that?
I mean, St. Nicholas seemed like he was a nice guy. And,
do you feel like there's real concerns there where it's actually like a bad idea to celebrate sort of this myth about a guy who comes down the chimney and gives gifts and comes from the great north or whatever?
I mean, I think what kind of cracks me up when people talk about like the whole Santa Satan thing is it's just hard for me to take seriously, precisely because I feel like Santa's hard to take seriously. It's just this obviously kind of absurd myth that like it's kind of the whole point that it's so unrealistic. I mean, I don't find anything particularly moving or touching about Santa Claus, and I don't find any reason to want to incorporate him into my Christmas celebration. But like, I just don't like evil. It's like, is Winnie the Pooh evil? I mean, it's just like this.
Well, okay, but to steelman that argument, plenty of people would say it's lying to your kids to tell them like there's this mythical figure and whatever.
It's lying to your kids to talk about the tooth fairy and
all those things.
It's kind of on that level. I mean, I wouldn't do it for that reason. Like I wouldn't want my kids to actually think there's this literal guy that I feel like you.
But I think the idea that people do that is sort of goofy. Like,
I mean,
why would you sort of like try to like prop up this myth for young kids and then eventually you're going to learn that you're like it's not for real. Like if you're going to do mythology, I feel like it's a weird like westernization of mythology.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the whole idea about mythology is like you have these like odd pictures and scenes that you refresh your memory on every year, but you already understand that this is not real life, but maybe like tells a truth, some truth to it or something.
Right.
So in some ways, like if I would celebrate Santa and I would tell the stories and stuff, like I wouldn't act like it's a real story. Like that seems like a goofy, very, very very like true versus false kind of metaphor rather than like stories and narratives are not necessarily true versus false or literal versus non-literal, but more like what kind of truth does it convey? Now I think there might be actually within the narrative some problematic things within the Santa narrative of like if you basically it's all dependent on like the good or bad deeds that you do and like I don't know if that's the most healthy narrative in the first place, and it doesn't seem that beautiful to me to start with.
This overweight guy with the big white beard who drives reindeer around. It's just
it's the worst part of Christmas decor. It's all the Santa stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I used to fantasize about going around with the BB gun and shooting down all the pop-up Santas.
You mean the inflatables?
Yeah, the inflatables. Yeah.
I still hate inflatables with a passion. Every time I see them in the city, I breathe threats of rage against them. So I guess I'm not far away from your past.
Right.
But just personally speaking, inflatables I think are the most destroy people's lawns. They're so disturbing. So I personally, right now, I have a thing of kind of celebrating when a rainstorm happens. And they all
right.
But anyway, odd part of my own psyche. But anyway,
I mean, I think the final word on Santa Claus is don't take him seriously. I don't know. It's just it's a weird myth that I'm not wanting to incorporate, and also don't feel like it's particularly dangerous in any way.
Okay, what about Christmas carols that talk about Santa and the reindeer and Jingle Bells? And
I don't think Jingle Bells talks about Santa. Okay. It's harmless. It's just funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that tends to be my perspective on it. Yeah. What do you think?
No, I guess I don't have a super strong opinion on it. I feel like, again, if you're going to teach your children little bits of Western mythology like that, you should probably do it in a healthy way so that they actually understand what mythology is.
Sure.
It shouldn't be taught in some sort of dumb literal way that makes your kids grow up and be like, oh, my parents were lying to me. That's probably stupid. But I don't have a super strong opinion beyond that if you teach it in a healthy way. I mean, but I think the bigger thing is what is Christmas going to be for you? Yeah. And I think the sorts of traditions that I would want my family to celebrate, that we do celebrate already, are traditions that more, I think more accurately and I hope more beautifully actually portray the stuff that I really care about when it comes to Christmas. So. Yeah.
I mean, I think about, if I have kids, I won't try to shelter them from Santa or tell them that it's evil. I'll just tell them, hey, it's this silly myth. And, some of my Christmas albums have a couple more traditional, Christmas classics that mention Santa Claus. And I'm not, thinking that I'm going to hurt my family by having them exposed to any of that.
Yeah. I mean, I for sure want my kids to know, the myth. Yeah. But I just don't think I'm going to make it that big of a part of Christmas.
Again, it's just hard for me to take it seriously.
Just sort of lame. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So secondly, one of the objections that's brought up is about the history of Christmas. Do you want to shed any light on that? Some people are like, well, it was the winter solstice and the Roman Catholics kind of Christianized this pagan celebration to get everyone drunk on Christmas instead of on winter solstice.
So what? I think that's my response. Why would I care? I think that's...
Well, okay, but why do people care?
Well, I think it's this idea that if you can trace something back to having some kind of a questionable origin, then maybe you should think twice.
The thing is contaminated.
Yeah, then maybe you should think twice about it. But if you're going that far back, do you have another word for the days of the week or for the months that are based on Roman gods? Is that a problematic? Is that the pagan origins of the word Sunday or whatever? I don't know. It just always struck me as being odd because it was so what if a lot of the specific traditions way back in the day, we're talking centuries ago, we're not talking about 50 years ago, we're talking about a long time ago that these were pagan traditions. And I think there can be
but they borrowed the trees and they borrowed the stuff from the winter solstice.
I mean, but at some point, what traditions do people have that don't in some way connect back to some unregenerate person's tradition? It's just, what if sledding was started by some pagan people? The pagan origins of sledding or the pagan origins of skiing, or what if wearing mittens was something that, why would somebody care? Maybe you feel like I'm not seriously engaging with it, but that's just kind of, for something that far ago and that removed from our context, it just always struck me as odd that someone would care that something,
I think the myth of historical contamination is something that we should dispose of, because the fact is Christians actually do redeem a lot of stuff in a lot of cultures, right? And Christians bring new meaning into old traditions and infuse, and this does not have to be syncretism. If, for example, modern Christmas Day celebrations would involve, naming the spirits of our ancestors and kissing stones that had, then I'd be like, okay, that's problematic. We need to get back to the gospel.
Yeah.
But in terms of, it's actually, I think, a really beautiful thing that throughout the centuries in many, many different cultures, Christianity has come into a culture and then a celebration that before had actually really bad roots. Before was serving themselves, people offering stuff to idols, people engaging in sexual debauchery or whatever, drunkenness, that Christians were able to take that and redeem it and turn it into something that was Christ-centered. Mm-hmm. And so I think the question is not, is it historically contaminated because it was connected to something bad in the past, but has it actually been turned into something that's Christ-honoring? And I think when it comes to Christmas, it's like, what else is Christmas if it's not Christ-honoring?
Right.
And understood, there are some ways that people celebrate Christmas that are not today. But
sure.
There's just no way you can tell me that, somebody like your parents or others who grew up with a good tradition of Christmas and had trees and had some of the lights and stuff like that. There's no way you're going to tell me that that's not Christ-centered, since they did have Jesus. They were worshiping Jesus and giving his story and stuff.
Because way back in the day, these traditions really started with, I think in fairness though, if someone, and I think this is part of the reason why there is a divide. I think people that have a background that is not so positive,
mm-hmm.
They actually like do think back to negative tradition.
Yeah, and then I think that's totally fair for somebody to feel like I can't, like it's not, for me, it's not a joyful, healthy thing for me to celebrate Christmas, because I personally have my own history is sort of contaminating the celebration. I think that's fair.
Yeah,
but absolutely. I also think that shouldn't be passed on to the next generation.
Probably, yeah, that's probably the case. I think the whole, perhaps some of the pagan origin thing, I don't know, this could be wrong, but it might partly stem from feeling like people had tried too hard to defend the idea of Christmas to the point that it's like this strong Christian tradition that, is like you almost should biblically celebrate this in order to like be a good Christian. I don't know if that vibe has ever come across in some context and people feel like they need to point out, hey, like this is actually not, mm-hmm. like if someone actually feels like, all Christians need to celebrate this, then I think it is fair to be like, hey, this is actually something that like was kind of recycled from some bad things in the past. Like this is not something everyone needs to celebrate. But I agree with that. There is no reason why someone should feel any kind of obligation to celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's absolutely a case where, what Paul talks about, the difference between believers on holidays comes into play. If someone feels like, I just do not like the idea of, green and red colors and this and going and bundling up and going caroling. It's like, I just don't like it. It's fine. Yeah. That's your prerogative.
Fine.
So, but I don't know. Maybe that partly comes into play. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that was never how I viewed it. Yeah. I think where going back to the thing of pagan origins and all that, what is relevant, I think, is if something has current connotations within a culture. I feel like that is different.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So if I would go cut a Christmas tree and people would see me and be like, oh man, I didn't know he was into, but that doesn't exist in today's culture.
Like, he worships the tree god?
Yeah. Exactly. Right. I'm so surprised
the best, worst Bible verse that I heard quoted in favor of banning Christmas trees was using the one in Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 46, where the guy brings in a tree from the forest and cuts it up and makes it says something about bringing a tree into the house or something like that. But of course he's building an idol with it, using part of it to warm himself in the fire, using part of it to build an idol. And they're like, but they only quote the part about like bringing a tree into the house is so bad. It's like, okay, guys, context kind of matters a lot.
It does. Yeah. No, I was joking with Sue about this because we got our Christmas tree a few days ago. And then there's some verses in Jeremiah I was reading that maybe it's the verses you're thinking of, I'm not sure, but it said something about, a tree. And I was joking, and this is a sign that we shouldn't have gotten. But no, yeah, I think once people have to make an argument like that, then I think that's when it becomes more questionable. But okay, like to come back to the whole culture thing, I don't celebrate Halloween because I feel like there are current negative connotations with it that I don't want to be associated with. And I don't find it a very beautiful holiday that I want to redeem. Like, I'm not going to turn it into, these skeletons stand for, our place before the rebirth. It just, I don't know. I just don't find anything I really want to latch onto with that. And I think there is a valid critique whenever certain traditions are confusing to people. And I think that's where some of the whole, sacrificing to idols type teaching could be applied. But that just isn't the case with Christmas. The people who see you celebrating Christmas and think, oh, wow, I can't believe they're doing that because there's all these pagan origins that is associated with this are other cranky Christians. I mean, maybe that's a little bit mean, but I mean, that's honestly the only...
It's never unbelievers who are confused. They're like, oh, you're a Christian, so you celebrate Christmas.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's, absolutely changes the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about one more objection, and that is Christmas has been consumerized. It's been all about selling as much, soon as Thanksgiving's over, if it's an online Black Friday sale, sometimes it's like halfway through the year, you're already having like sales for Christmas and stuff. It's all about selling as much cheap stuff to people so that they can fill their stockings with junk.
Right.
Sort of cheap toys that you use for a little bit and break anyway, or even like, buying all these expensive iPads and tablets and whatever to kind of satiate this need we have for feeling up to date and like feeling connected. Like we have the best of everything and stuff. It's become very consumerist, and I think there's no way around that.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably the strongest objection someone can make to Christmas, to celebrating Christmas, is like take the cultural thing. Like in the modern day cultural context, Christmas is like the season where the most people commit suicide, there's most depression, anxiety, all this stuff. People are overworked trying to get all their shopping and fulfill everybody's desires and needs, and overworking so they have enough money to pay for whatever their kids demand. And so, I mean, there are significant issues with the way some people celebrate Christmas.
For sure.
So let's talk about that objection last, which I think then is going to lead us into talking about like how do we respond and think about how to celebrate Christmas well.
I mean, maybe this is too simple, but just don't buy the cheap junky toys and don't stuff your stockings with junk. I mean, that's in some sense, I think it should be that simple. I mean, there's a lot of things going on that we don't need to be part of. Yeah. And in the same way that we don't need to, have a big Santa to do. If you don't like things that are overly commercialized, make sure your Christmas isn't. Okay. Is that too simple?
Well, yeah. I mean, in the sense that I think we need a better playbook.
Sure.
But yes, I think ultimately don't play into the commercialization.
Right.
There's probably something really wrong with a view of Christmas or a celebration of Christmas where it's kind of all about the stuff you're getting.
Uh-huh.
Like that's not really a celebration of Jesus so much as it is a celebration of what stuff you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's fair critique. And if you celebrate Christmas in a way that's unhelpful, then think about ways to reshape that in a way that's helpful.
And I think even to touch on gift giving a little bit, like my family always gave gifts. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a time... I feel like my family was pretty consistently helpful in getting gifts that were useful. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was younger, I would get, I wouldn't get toys or that kind of thing. But it's almost like you would wait to buy certain things until Christmas, and then that would be your Christmas gift. It's not like there's a bunch of stuff you wouldn't have ever gotten if it wasn't for Christmas.
And did you all buy gifts for each other, or?
Somewhat. I think that's more developed. Yeah. I'm trying to think when I was younger if I got gifts for other people. Not much, not so much when I was younger. I mean, I think some people have a tradition of that, which is great. It developed more. I think my younger siblings would have done that more. I mean, by the time I'm kind of thinking, having to think back because for a long time I've been getting my family members Christmas presents. Uh-huh. Some of my family members are just insanely good at it. I'm not like this incredibly creative gift giving person. One of my brothers is just insane at it. He just knows exactly what to get everybody. Mm. So I think that's also something to think about. Like, it's not just about getting a gift. It's about the joy of thinking about something that you can give to someone else.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to make some case that somehow this is, someone might say, well, this is the birthday of Jesus, so we give gifts to celebrate his birthday. Like we get, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's a nice tradition, and it's a harmless tradition, and I don't think you have to like biblically justify why something like that happens. And if you would rather celebrate Christmas where there's no gift giving, or as some people do, set aside money for poor people or something, that's fine. I mean, there's no reason why anyone needs to feel an obligation to have a certain tradition.
Yeah. So in my family, my family would have not done gifts. My wife's family does a gift exchange where everybody gets one other person's gift. And so everybody gets a gift from one person.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's one way that you can absolutely fight against commercialization. Sure. Just say like, you're not going to have a ton of gifts.
Right.
You're not going to spend all year thinking about the gifts to give each person. And man, if you got 11 kids, if you got 10 siblings, that's crazy.
Of course.
But yeah, I think there's practical ways, and a gift exchange is just one of those ways, but there's practical ways to ensure that you don't degenerate into sort of, it's selfish kind of Christmas is all about me and what I get sort of atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I think we need to really care. Those of us who do celebrate Christmas, I think we really need to care about not becoming centered on stuff. And Christmas, of all things that Christmas should not be, it should not be a time where it's centered around us, and we spend all of our time thinking about what we might get and what we should, what we expect and all of that.
Yeah.
So Christmas, I think we do need to keep Christmas, if we celebrate it, into something that's really life-giving and healthy. And so that's something to think about for sure.
Yeah.
So do you want to go first? And talk about, so what are your Christmas traditions, and how do you feel that they're a helpful way to celebrate Jesus?
Well, I think on some level I've already gone over them. You know, the whole like Christmas music for me was a massive part of it. And
do you still keep Christmas music to only?
Yeah, December? Pretty much. A couple sneak peeks, but then it almost exclusively happens after Thanksgiving.
Nice.
That's the break. I think because in some sense I want to sell the idea of celebrating Christmas to people, because I don't feel like it's obviously not an imperative, but I want people to be like, man, this is something cool I want to think about.
Yes.
And I think the specifics of the traditions are not really the point, because so many of the things that mean something to me because there's a tradition that goes back ages that reminds me of things. So, for instance, there's some of the Christmas music that we listen to only this time of year. I remember listening to when I was like 4 or 5, and you hear a song turn on and it like throws you back. You don't even, you know what it's like when you're kind of thrown back to your memory, and you don't really know exactly what it is, but you just know it's something way back there, and it's and you're like, oh man, I don't want to ever lose that. Yeah. And I think there's a sense where a lot of Christmas traditions trigger that for me in a way that nothing else. There's no other time of year that like just instantly like, man, I remember that, and it kind of throws me back to that kind of thing. But beyond that, no, I do think there can be something incredibly spiritually significant and meaningful about Christmas, which is why I think some people might want to consider celebrating it who don't. And that is, there is something so incredibly beautiful and touching and joyful about the Christmas story. And of course, it's important to recognize that that's not all that happened. It's not only about Jesus coming down to earth as a baby, but I think there's a certain kind of mystery and beauty and hope that exists specifically in the story of Jesus coming down, the virgin birth, and just, I don't know, it's an incredibly bright spot in the Christian story, that having a time where you just kind of take time to sit and think about that. I don't know. And I find, for me, all those traditions have a way of bringing that to me in a way that, few other things can. And I have to think back a few days ago. I woke up and I was feeling a little bit tired, a little bit discouraged. I forget exactly what, and Oh Holy Night was playing, and hearing some of the words there, truly He taught us to love one another, and it touched something very deeply. It was almost like a spiritual moment for me, and And in a sense, you can say, like, we also need to move on to other parts of the story and think about the death of Christ and the pain that came later and resurrection.
Sure.
There's just something particularly beautiful and touching about the Christmas story, though, that I think taking time to kind of just sit and think about, what would life be like if we were still in our darkness, still awaiting the Messiah, and the Messiah had not come to earth. I just feel like there's so many reasons to want to have time set aside for that. And there's few ways to do that more than having certain traditions and festivities that you take time and set it aside to specifically do just that. And people could argue that we should do more of that for, the crucifixion or the resurrection.
I certainly argue the resurrection.
Yes, but I celebrate Easter too, so there's that.
Totally.
But I think it's just positive to have things like that times and traditions that help remind us of that. And again, the point isn't the specific traditions. Like I just like the time of year. I like kind of cold weather associated with, kind of bundling up and going Christmas caroling and, coming back and drinking hot cocoa and things like that. Going to Longwood Gardens, that's another long-standing tradition.
Nice.
All those kinds of things. But again, those things mean something to me partly because they've been there for so long.
Right.
And if someone was my age and had none of those traditions, I wouldn't expect them to instantly find them as moving as I do. At the same time, I think someone that kind of starts from scratch and says, "Hey, I'm going to put aside some time to think about Christ and read some of the passages that talk about some of the passages in Isaiah talk about, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given," and kind of focus on those things. It's really meaningful and really moving.
But I think there's something about celebration. There's something about a feast, where it's more than just sort of platonically setting aside a period of time. Like, okay, now I'm going to meditate on this. It's like, I think, training ourselves to experience joy in some ways. Like it's actually important to do things that give us joy and to connect that with the amazing gift that Jesus gave in coming himself. And the humility of the Jesus story, the humility of him coming as a king. One of my favorite songs around Christmas is "How Should a King Come?"
Oh yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay.
Actually leading that with my school choir next week. So
good.
Very familiar with it right now.
Right. Recognizing the humility of Jesus and the fact that it was in giving himself for the world as a baby that including in his death, obviously, and the way he lived and things like that. But there's something special about the fact that he chose to come through a virgin as a baby that shows his humility as the king of all the earth, but willing to come down and identify with us. And I think it's important to train ourselves in joy. So I think that's really good. Yeah. For me, were you done with your?
Go ahead.
So for me, it's certainly Christmas songs, although I wouldn't say that's the primary thing, but there's certain songs that I love. It's also more recently, something Verna and I have been working on is celebrating the Advent season. I know it's super popular right now, but taking a moment every Sunday, like once a week in the month of December, to read certain parts of the Christmas story and kind of the whole month long meditate on this. It's a way to stretch out the joy of the Christmas season, but also especially stretch out the period of the waiting, to sort of like live in that waiting period, because we still are waiting for Jesus to come back the second time. And incorporating little, we have a liturgy that we read together. That's a prayer to help us think about Jesus, especially through this season, and connect the waiting that the children of Israel had, waiting for the promised Messiah, to the waiting that we have now, waiting for the return of Jesus to, in a sense, settle the score and return all things to the way they should be. So those things, celebrating Advent, we have little figurines that we set out as we read different parts of the story. And we're kind of trying to develop these traditions as a family to stretch the time period that we have of thinking about and meditating on what Jesus did, to include a lot of festivities, but to stretch it out for kind of a longer period of time, so that 1/12 of the year, it's kind of focused on this really important event. So I think traditions that really, and we do lights around the house and getting boughs of certain evergreen trees and stuff, which I think is great. The point is, with whatever celebration you have, I think it should be joy-filled. It should be this kind of training of our imagination as we wait for the second coming of Jesus. And this fresh exploration every year of Jesus's humility and of the meaning of his gift ultimately, that I think should define the way we celebrate. So those are just a few quick things that come to my mind. We've been getting more into it. We have the Every Moment Holy. I mentioned the liturgy. It's Every Moment Holy, in case some of our audience wants to check that out. Short prayers and Bible readings that go along with it. That's a very beautiful way to celebrate Christmas. But those are some of the ways I think that we look at it. We want to lift Jesus up. Want it to be a time where we celebrate as a family, where we honor what Jesus did through just taking time to reflect and not just brushing it over.
Right, for sure.
So, anything else you want to add on celebrating Christmas?
I don't think so. No.
Take time to reflect, to meditate, and to really feast and have fun and enjoy. I mean, all of those things are so important for us as believers. Sometimes we fast and sometimes we feast, and both of those things are good as we wait for the coming redemption. But especially during this season, I think it's important to celebrate. Okay, see you all next time.